They didn't come with weapons, just a briefcase, a warning, and a deal no one thought Traoré would ever refuse. But what he said in that silent room, it shook even Washington. The sun had barely set in Ouagadougou. The air outside was warm, heavy, but inside the room, the silence was colder than stone. 3 men sat at the table. 2 were Americans. 1 was from Langley. They wore suits, smiled politely, and spoke with the calm rhythm of men used to, bending governments with words, not guns. And across from them, without a note or a guard by his side, sat Ibrahim Traoré. The room wasn't part of any official building. It was neutral ground, a discreet location secured through unofficial channels. No one knew they were there, not even most of Traoré's own team. That was the condition, complete secrecy. One of the Americans leaned forward. His voice was calm, almost warm. "We understand your position, Captain Traoré, and we admire your courage. But the choices you're making, they come with consequences." Traoré didn't flinch. His eyes locked onto the man's, calm but sharp, the kind of stare that doesn't speak often, but when it does, it rewrites history. The second agent opened the briefcase slowly, spinning it around for Traoré to see. Inside wasn't cash. It wasn't weapons. It was something far more dangerous. "These are classified agreements. Protection. Partnerships. We're not here to fight you. We're here to help you survive. Because if you don't choose carefully," he paused, "you won't be given a second chance." Traoré leaned back. He didn't speak, not yet. But something in his silence made even the room feel like it was holding its breath. The man from Langley continued. His words were colder now, stripped of their diplomatic sugar. "Your anti-West rhetoric, your alliances, you're creating problems that go beyond Burkina Faso. You're shaking things you don't fully understand." A single sentence. That's all it took. Traoré finally spoke. His voice was low, measured, unshaken. Maybe it's time they were shaken. The room froze. Even the man from Langley blinked, just once, unsure whether he'd misheard, or whether this young soldier was really refusing an offer men would kill for. But Traoré wasn't finished. "You've brought papers, warnings, promises, but the soil my people bleed on doesn't need another flag over it." He slid the briefcase gently back toward them, untouched. "Burkina Faso is not for sale." The men exchanged a glance. Their smiles were gone. The man from Langley finally closed the briefcase, but then he whispered something that changed the tone completely. "You don't understand what's coming." Traoré stared back, his voice quieter than before, but somehow even heavier. "I do, and I'm not afraid." The temperature in the room hadn't changed, but something else had. The tension, the weight in the air. It was no longer a negotiation. It was a quiet declaration of war, without the bullets, without the headlines, but no less real. The man from Langley closed the briefcase, but his hand lingered on it. Then, almost like a warning wrapped in a smile, he said, "Leadership like yours, it rarely ends peacefully." The silence that followed felt like thunder, but Traoré didn't even blink, his face calm, his breath steady. He had heard those kinds of threats before, but never this close, never this quiet, never this cold. "Peace was never handed to us," he replied. "We built it, and we'll defend it, with or without your permission." The agents exchanged another look. One of them leaned forward again, lowering his voice, as if trying one last time to steer the moment in their favor. "Listen, we know what Wagner is doing. We know who's in your ear. You think you're independent, but you're becoming a pawn in someone else's game." Traoré gave a half smile, but there was no joy in it. "And you think you're not doing the same thing?" He stood up. No guards rushed in, no chaos. just the sound of a chair sliding against the floor, and the voice of a man who knew this moment would define more than just himself. You want me to turn away from my people, to compromise our future for safety you control. But let me ask you something. He stepped closer, and the agents didn't move. When has the West ever protected us without first using us? No one answered, because there was no answer. One of the men reached into his coat. For a split second, the air stiffened until he revealed only a small envelope. He slid it across the table. If you change your mind, burn this after reading. Traoré looked down at it, then back up. I don't burn what I never read. And with that, he turned and walked toward the exit, the silence of the agents following him like shadows that knew they were losing grip. But just before he opened the door, one of them called out, "This isn't personal, Captain. You'll understand that one day." He paused, turned slightly, and said just loud enough to be heard, "It became personal the moment you came here." Then he left the room. No applause, no victory. Just a young man walking into the night, carrying a choice that could either break him or build something the world wasn't ready for. Back inside, the agent sat still for a long moment. Then, one whispered, "He's going to be a problem." As Traoré stepped into the night, the city lights flickered in the distance. But he wasn't looking at the lights. He was looking past them into a future no longer chained to silence. Back in his private residence, the guards noticed something different. Not fear, not anger, just a quiet focus in his eyes. Like a man who had walked through a fire and come back carrying something heavier than flames. His aide approached him cautiously. "Captain, should we alert the others?" Traoré shook his head slowly. "No, not yet." "And the Americans? They'll speak, and when they do, the world will see their true face." He didn't say another word. Instead, he went into his study and sat alone. No reports, no advisors, just him. And the weight of what had just happened. Because Traoré knew something the CIA hadn't expected. They thought pressure would make him compromise. But they had only confirmed what he'd long suspected. That the West feared something more than bullets. It feared a leader it couldn't control. The next morning, something unexpected happened. An encrypted message arrived at the presidential compound. It wasn't from Russia, not China, not Ikawas. It was from an insider in the very agency that had visited him. Anonymous, untraceable, but clear. One line stood out in the message. They didn't come to threaten you. They came to bait you. Attached was a small file, audio. Traoré played it once. And as the cold voices filled the room, repeating key lines from the night before, he realized something. The meeting hadn't been a warning. It had been a test, a psychological profile, recorded and reviewed. To measure him, to study how he would respond, and most importantly, to decide what would happen next. "They're preparing something," he whispered. "And they want to know if I'll break before it starts." But he didn't break. Not then. Not when he heard what the audio revealed. Because buried deep in the file was another voice. Not from the meeting, but a voice that came after. One that belonged to a senior CIA official, speaking about him. If he won't fold, we'll isolate him. Economically, politically, if needed, physically. The words weren't just cruel. They were a map of what was coming. First the offer, Traoré said softly to himself. Then the pressure. And if that fails, the erasure. He sat back. Then he called in his aide. "Get me the press team. We speak tonight." That evening, the national broadcaster's feed was cleared without warning. No commercials, no intro music. Just a live image. Ibrahim Traoré seated behind a simple wooden desk, the Burkina flag behind him. His eyes held no anger, only clarity, and his words were unlike anything the West had expected. "To my people, And to those who still believe we are a nation to be puppeted, I have something to say." He paused. The entire country was listening. So was the world. "Last night, I met with foreign agents, men who came not as guests, but as handlers. They carried no chains, but their words were meant to bind. They offered safety in exchange for silence, influence in exchange for surrender. But we do not trade dignity for comfort." He leaned slightly forward, voice steady. "Burkina Faso will choose its own path. Not Moscow's, not Washington's, ours. And to those who fear that choice, know this: I do not fear you." The silence that followed was deafening. But Traoré wasn't done. He reached into his coat, pulling out the sealed envelope left by the CIA, the one he had refused to read. "They told me to burn this after reading. I never opened it." He held it up, then struck a match, and burned it live on camera. The flame ate through the paper slowly, curling its corners in orange and black. Symbolic, raw, final. "This," he said, "is what happens when threats arrive at our door, disguised as partnerships." The broadcast ended abruptly. No anthem, no signature, just static. But that one act, the burning of the envelope, spread like wildfire. Within hours, the clip flooded the internet. Millions watched it on repeat. Africa applauded. Europe shifted uncomfortably. Washington, silent. But inside the walls of Langley, the mood had changed. In one room, the same agents from that meeting were being briefed by their superiors. One of them stared at the monitor showing Traoré's broadcast replaying. He clenched his jaw. "We should have pushed harder," but the senior official shook his head. "No, we pushed exactly the right amount. Now we'll see what the fire reveals." And that's when the next step began. Behind closed doors, off the record, and far more dangerous than any briefcase or letter. The next morning, Traoré received a private message through encrypted diplomatic channels. It wasn't from the CIA. It was from a former African head of state, one who had once tried to walk the same path Traoré was now forging. The message was brief. They will not stop now. Not after being embarrassed on global television. They will use media, sanctions, internal betrayal. Stay 10 steps ahead. Or they will write your ending before you can write your legacy. Traoré read it twice, then whispered to himself, "So it begins," and it did. Within 48 hours, Western news outlets released a wave of headlines. New concerns over Traoré's foreign ties. Burkina Faso leader accused of undermining regional stability. Sources claim Russian operatives embedded in military circles. Each article echoed the same message: fear, suspicion, instability. But none offered proof. Traoré watched the storm build, brick by brick. This wasn't journalism. It was strategy, narrative warfare. And he wasn't surprised. But the part he didn't expect came from within. One of his closest advisors, a man who had served beside him since the early resistance days, suddenly requested to step away from public duty. No scandal, no conflict, just silence and departure. Traoré knew what it meant. "They found his weakness," he said quietly, staring out the window, "and they used it." The room remained still. He turned to his chief of security. "From now on, every conversation happens face to face. No digital channels. No phones." "Yes, Captain." The walls around him were tightening, but his spirit wasn't, because Traoré had something the CIA couldn't decode. Conviction rooted in something deeper than fear. But conviction alone wasn't enough. So that night, he called a secret meeting, not with generals, but with young activists, teachers, farmers, and community leaders. People who weren't in power, but who made the country move. He sat among them, not above them. And he said, "They are trying to isolate me. So I need you to become something they can't isolate. A nation that speaks before I have to. They will pressure you, mock you, call you misled. But this country is not just a flag or a face on a podium. It's all of you. And if I fall, I want them to fall knowing they never silenced us. The room was quiet. Then one young teacher stood up and said, "Then we'll make sure your voice echoes even if your mouth is silenced." It wasn't just a statement. It was a vow, one the world would soon hear, louder than any headline. In the following weeks, the pressure mounted, just as predicted. International aid packages were suddenly delayed for review. Border tensions with neighboring countries, previously calm, began to escalate quietly. Western NGOs published reports citing rising authoritarianism under Traoré's rule. It was death by 1,000 cuts, but Traoré didn't flinch. Instead, he did something no one expected. He invited international journalists, the same ones publishing hit pieces, to visit Burkina Faso unrestricted. No handlers. No pre-screened interviews. Just truth. Raw, unfiltered, and on the ground. They came skeptical at first. Some expected propaganda. What they found was a country in motion. Farmers building cooperative systems. Youth organizing educational forums in villages. Soldiers helping rebuild broken infrastructure instead of patrolling it with fear. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One American journalist, shaken by what she saw, wrote a single line in her blog post that went viral. He may be young, he may be defiant, but Ibrahim Traoré is not a dictator. He's a mirror. And maybe that's what frightens the West most. But with the global tide shifting, something darker began to brew in silence. A meeting was held in a private conference room, not in Africa, but in Europe. Security agencies, think tanks, allies. The topic: containment strategy for West African destabilization. But everyone in that room knew what it truly meant. One former intelligence chief said it bluntly: "You want to keep him from becoming the next Sankara? Then you better act before he becomes untouchable." The room nodded. No official record of the meeting would exist, but its consequences would. Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré received intelligence from a trusted source. A plan was unfolding. Subtle, deadly, and it wasn't an invasion or a coup. It was a character assassination, digital and political. Deepfake videos were already in development. Leaked documents were being fabricated to show alliances that didn't exist. Even private messages were being manipulated to make him appear unstable, dangerous. When he saw the first clip, he didn't speak for a long time. Then he turned to his aide and said, "They can fake my voice, but they'll never fake my silence. We speak before they do. Release the full story, every meeting, every tape, every threat. Let the people decide." And that night, an unedited recording of the CIA meeting, secretly captured by one of Traoré's own covert units, was leaked to the public. The voices were unmistakable, the threats undeniable, and the truth louder than any lie. The leak hit harder than any bullet ever could. Within hours, the recording of the CIA meeting topped every trending chart across Africa, and soon, the world. Social media exploded. The audio was raw. No filters, no edits. People heard every word. The offers, the veiled threats. The moment, Traoré pushed the briefcase back and said, "Burkina Faso is not for sale." The internet responded with a roar. Hashtag, "We are not for sale." Hashtag TRAO. Or he told them, hashtag Africa is awake from Accra to Algiers, Nairobi to Lagos. The story wasn't just about Traoré anymore. It had become a symbol of resistance, of dignity, of a continent finding its voice again. Even those who once doubted him began to listen, but not everyone celebrated. Inside intelligence circles, the leak was seen as a direct provocation, a slap to the face of Western intelligence, and more dangerously, as a signal that Traoré could not be handled. The next phase was darker, more ruthless. Anonymous sources began flooding global newsrooms with false reports, framing Traoré for things he never said, never did. Alleged bank accounts, phantom deals, anonymous testimonies. One Western anchor even aired a segment saying, "If he's not stopped now, we might be looking at the birth of a new extremist front in West Africa." But Traoré refused to defend lies. He issued no denial press conferences, no rebuttals. Instead, he traveled to the smallest, most remote village in Burkina Faso and gave a speech in front of farmers, elders, and barefoot children. No cameras, just one local radio transmitter. When the powerful cannot control your voice, they will try to corrupt your image. But remember this, if they're attacking your face, it's because they've already lost your heart. He paused. They fear the sound of a free people, so speak louder. His words traveled farther than the lies. And then something unexpected happened. A group of African leaders, quietly watching the situation unfold, reached out in private. One after another, some were cautious, others afraid, but all said a variation of the same thing. "We see you, and we're watching." Traoré's impact had gone beyond politics. It was emotional now, spiritual, the kind of fire that couldn't be negotiated with or quietly extinguished. They couldn't touch him with silence. They couldn't stop him with lies. But now, they would try something else. An old strategy, one used countless times before. Divide from within. Within days, rumors spread. Not from foreign media, but from within Burkina Faso itself. Talks of betrayal. Allegations that Traoré was centralizing power. Claims that he was cutting off even his most loyal allies. Some of the voices were real. Others, planted. And for the first time since the CIA meeting, Traoré noticed the shift. Whispers in corridors. Loyal faces avoiding eye contact. That night, he sat alone in his study, lights off, staring at the map of his country. Not a map of borders, but of people, villages, wounds. He didn't need soldiers to win this war. He needed memory. He needed truth to outlive manipulation. Suddenly, his chief of security entered, pale, shaken. "Captain, we intercepted something. A file, sent from a Western intelligence outpost to a proxy group inside the country. It wasn't an assassination order. It was a staged rebellion. Plan, meant to spark panic, then justify foreign intervention to restore stability. The details were clear. Foment unrest. Trigger violence in a northern region. Blame it on a splinter faction opposing Traoré. Force the government's collapse from within, all without firing a single foreign bullet. Traoré stood silently, then said, "If they want chaos, we'll give them something they've never seen before. A nation that refuses to break." The next morning, before the staged event could begin, Traoré went live again. But this time, not on national television. He streamed from his phone, walking through the heart of a local market, surrounded by civilians. He spoke with no script, just his voice and the people. "They're trying to convince you I'm the problem, that your hunger, your struggle, your fear begins and ends with me. But ask yourself, who controls the banks that withhold our money? Who wrote the reports that cut our aid? Who came here not with help, but with offers tied in chains?" People around him nodded. Some wept, others filmed. "I am not your enemy. I am your mirror. And if they destroy me, they're trying to shatter your reflection." That single video, grainy and handheld, outperformed every slick propaganda piece pushed by the media machine. Because it was real, raw, human. And suddenly, the world saw through the fog. Western analysts scrambled. One whispered on live television, "We miscalculated. We thought he'd fold like the others." But Traoré wasn't folding. He was rising. And now, so were millions with him. The world had tried everything to bring him down. Diplomacy, deception, sanctions, lies, silence. But Traoré had withstood it all, not with power, but with clarity. And now, that clarity was spreading faster than borders could contain. In Senegal, university students held vigils, quoting his speeches. In South Africa, street artists painted murals of him beside other African icons, not as a president, but as a symbol. And in a quiet town in Haiti, a teacher told her class, "You may never meet him, but remember his name, because that voice was not just his, it was ours." But Traoré wasn't chasing legacy. He still woke up before dawn, still read handwritten letters from school children, still sat alone at night, knowing that peace without pressure is a luxury he may never know. One evening, he returned to that same private room where it had all started, where the CIA sat across from him, briefcase in hand, threat in their voice. He sat alone at that table now. No agents, no threats, just memory. He placed a small recorder on the table, pressed play, and listened to the words they once used to try and bend him. "If he won't fold, we'll isolate him, economically, politically, if needed, physically." He let it finish, then whispered, "You isolated me, but you forgot something." He stood up, calm, grounded. "I wasn't standing alone. I was standing with millions." He walked out of the room, leaving the recorder playing, echoing behind him like a ghost that no longer had power. Outside, children were laughing. A market was closing. And in the distance, the sound of drums, not war drums, but of celebration. Because no matter what came next, the message had already been sent. Burkina Faso was not for sale, and neither was its soul. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. For more untold stories the world tries to silence, because sometimes the quietest voice becomes the loudest echo. They thought breaking him would end the story, but they forgot. When one voice rises for truth, millions learn how to never kneel again.